All right, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the American Enterprise Institute. My name is Stan Voiger. I'm a senior fellow here at AEI. I'm delighted. We're doing this event, the launch event for the George Washington University Center for Washington Area Studies' annual State of the Capital Region report in person. But a warm welcome as well to our online viewership. Weirdly, that has now become the default mode of attending our events. This year's report focuses on transportation issues. Now, transportation is always an area of public policy that receives tremendous attention, obviously, but it's been particularly salient over the past 2 years. Federally, we had a major infrastructure bill that passed after many years of discussion. The COVID pandemic, of course, led to a significant shift to remote work and increased demand for more spacious housing. And those changes have really transformed commuting patterns, though the jury is out on what the long-term effects will be. The DC metro area, with its disproportionate share of white-collar workers and of federal government workers, witnessed particularly dramatic changes, and much of today's event will serve to shed light on those developments. And then, of course, and I'm not going to pretend this is part of a global or a national trend, there's the ongoing disaster that is WMATA here in the DC region. The proceedings today will unfold as follows. Leah Brooks will first present key findings from the 2022 State of the Capital Region report. Leah is associate professor in the Trachtenberg School of Public Policy and Public Administration at the George Washington University, and she's the director of the Center for Washington Area Studies there. We will then turn to our panel discussion. Our esteemed panelists are Michael Abrams, who is managing director at Volker Pratt, where he's responsible for executing the investment strategy for a broad range of products, including multifamily, office, and mixed-use developments. Kanek Aguirre is a member of the City Council of Alexandria, Virginia. He is the chair of the Northern Virginia Transportation Commission and an alternate director on the WMATA Board of Directors. He asked me to make sure it's an alternate director. Stuart Schwartz, finally, is executive director and a founder of the Coalition for Smarter Growth, leading smart growth organization in the DC region, which addresses the interconnected issues of land use, transportation, urban design, housing, and the environment. Their conversation will be moderated by Ian Duncan. Ian is a reporter at the Washington Post, previously at the Baltimore Sun. He covers federal transportation agencies and the politics of transportation. If you have questions for the panel, if you're here, you can just get up and scream at us. If you're at home, you can submit them to john.kearns@aei.org. That's KEARNS. Or on Twitter with hashtag AskAEIEcon. If you missed that, details are on the event page, and you can also just email me. And remember, ideally, your questions will end in a question mark. With that, Leah, welcome, and please take it away.
Thank you, Stan, for hooking him up with the stool. Thank you for those of you who managed to take transportation of any form to get here today, and a warm welcome to everybody online. As Stan said, I'm Leah. We are previewing today our State of the Capital Region 2022, which is a joint effort between me, Stan, Brian, who's in the audience, thanks, Brian, Jackie, who is online, and Jenny, who is probably on a plane. We are delighted to write this annual report. This year, we had stupendous assistance from 2 research assistants, Katie Fagan and Kenan Dogan. So the mission of the Center for Washington Area Studies is to improve the lives of people in the greater Washington area by studying the neighborhoods and communities of our region. We produce policy-relevant research on the Capital Region, and we host events for the public on topical issues like this one, if we can get the public to come back. And we write an annual State of the Capital Region report. In 2019, our inaugural year, we wrote on housing. In 2020, we wrote on demographics. The pandemic happened, and then we decided we needed to write something about COVID and work, so that's what we did. Last year, in 2021, we wrote about jobs, and this year we are writing about transportation. If you have suggestions for next year, we're all ears. So to start with this year, in 1970, we are focusing on transportation, and I think what we can do at the center, which I think is sometimes harder for policymakers and even for people in industry, is to take a pretty long view. So I can tell you that in 1970, around the region, so these are numbers for the entire greater Washington area, most of us got around by car, so slightly under 80%. That's about the same in 1980. It's about the same in 1990. It's about the same in 2000, about the same in 2010, and about the same today. Most of us get around by car. You know, a non-trivial, slightly more than 10, 15% take public transportation. And by US standards, that's pretty amazing. And public transportation rests, in my view, on a subsidy bargain, because public transit in the US operates at a loss and we subsidize it. Riders get a subsidy, a potentially shorter commute, or if not a shorter commute, then a commute where you can work or do something more pleasant. Drivers get fewer cars on the road and ideally a faster ride than they would have in the absence of public transit. And everyone gets cleaner air. It's not clear that bargain is going to hold up if enough people don't take transit and if electric vehicles appear. So here's how to think about transit ridership over the medium run. So in the mid-aughts, we saw transit ridership, this is across all WMATA types of service, increasing. Then we see a modest decline through about 2017. And if you can remember back before pre-pandemic and Metro's Back to Good campaign, you can see that here, maybe, in that slight uptick in WMATA ridership. And then we have the pandemic, and you can see ridership fall off a cliff. And this is, I think, really the challenge that we will in part talk about today. We don't have a sense of what this line is going to look like in the future, and it has big implications. It has big implications not just for transit riders, but for drivers too, because transit affects the air you breathe, the congestion on the roads. It has implications beyond the people on the metro or on the bus. So are these worries just an urban issue? So I'm going to show you now a few slides looking at things by urban, that's the dark blue, suburban, slightly lighter blue, and exurban areas, which you can see on this map. So first I'm going to show you the share of people in each type of jurisdiction that ride transit. So in 1970, you can see that over 30% of urban residents rode transit in their commute to work. Suburban residents under 10%, and exurban residents is like barely any of them. And that pattern has held where urban residents remain more likely to ride transit. But what I want to point out is that the big growth in ridership share is coming in the suburban and exurban areas. And what you want to remember is that there are more suburban and exurban residents in the DC area than there are urban residents, which translates into what I think was a big surprise to all of us. Now I'm going to show you not the share of ridership by each area, but looking at all transit riders. So where do transit riders live? In 1970, most 3/4 of transit riders lived in one of those urban jurisdictions. That picture has changed dramatically. So now, urban riders account for about half of all transit riders, which means that the politics of transit ridership have also changed, and that transit ridership should matter importantly to the suburbs as well. And even you can see that large growth in the exurban areas. So to think about what all this means going forward, the challenges, not just for transit ridership, but for roads and all kinds of other forms of mobility in the region, we are delighted to have Ian Duncan from the Washington Post to moderate our discussion, and 3 panelists, Michael Abrams, Kanak Aguirre, and Stuart Schwartz, that Stan already introduced, so I will not. We appreciate all of them very much coming, and we are very sorry that Allison Davis, the Vice President of Planning from WMATA, was not able to make it due to recent WMATA leadership changes. But she did want me, I will pull out one key fact that she wanted me to point out, which is that only 20% of trips on WMATA are commute trips. That leaves a lot of other trips that WMATA is hosting that are important to our region and that we would like to make sure keep existing. So I'll turn it over to Ian and the panel. Please come on up, and thank you, everybody.
All right, thanks everyone for being here. I'll just jump right in. I mean, that was a good summary, I think, of where we've seen things go, and so now we want to try and look ahead. And so I want to just start by asking everyone on the panel what their best predictions are about, is there a new normal? How are we going to see commute patterns that have been kind of irrevocably changed by the pandemic, or might things snap back to what they were like before? So I don't know, Stuart, if you want to start off.
It's dangerous predicting the future, and I'm not going to really try. I think there is some level of consensus that we expect telecommuting to increase, at least for the office workforce. And you see numbers from 25% settling out to 40%. It all depends on whether you're counting all workers or those folks who have office-type jobs where where they don't have to be in person. I think we should. We won't really know, though, until we see how the federal government handles it, how major companies handle it. You know, you hear Governor Youngkin saying no telecommuting on the one hand, and I think leaders, managers are all trying to figure this out and what's going to work. And we also may have to evaluate all the sociology of offices and mentoring and so forth and how we're going to use it. So very hard to predict, but I think we can assume telecommuting rising to a higher level than it has been, maybe double what it had been in the past, which was up to maybe 16%. And then that has implications for our roads and for our transit systems. Really, for roads, we're already seeing it. If you remove just 5% of peak hour trips, your roads function much better, much more smoothly. So we like to think that you don't have to widen any more roads if we have the telecommute option. People can decide if there's congestion that day, they'll telecommute. And you'll get a new equilibrium on the roads. Transit, it definitely will hurt Metro Rail peak hour for all those office workers. And but it also may create the opportunity to redeploy transit service and have high-frequency service all day, evenings, weekends, and live a car-free, car-light lifestyle using that system.
Kanak, are you seeing what your constituents doing? Are they changing their behaviors? Are you thinking it's going to stick around?
Yeah, first off, I just want to say good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being here and spending some time with us, and thank you to AEI for hosting and everyone else for organizing this. I'm with Stuart in that I don't like looking into the crystal ball because you're never too sure what you're going to see. And I want to touch on what Leah brought up at the very end when she said that only about 20% of the trips are commuter trips, right? So that means people are going to do errands, medical visits, dropping kids off at school, whatever it might be. And I think that is the change that we're going to be seeing in how our public transit starts adapting to that. Because we need to make sure that there's consistent all-day service that is reliable, because that's been shown that whenever it's reliable and consistent, people are more likely to utilize it, and especially if it's during the day when people need to go do all the rest of these errands and not just go back and forth from work. So I think that's one thing, and I think the second thing that I would mention really quickly too is our economy is starting to diversify a little bit more because this region has been so dependent on the federal labor force, and so that's what's driven a lot of this public transit, but now we have other groups coming in, like Boeing is coming back here, Amazon, and some other groups. So then I think that's going to help fuel some of the changes to our public transit as well.
And Michael, you hopefully will make a prediction because I imagine your business.
I'll be a little bit more definitive. So, I mean, we see the transportation issue kind of from two standpoints. One is kind of the example of our own office and how it's operating and what we can extrapolate from that. And the second is as an owner of office buildings that we're trying to fill, and we're seeing the dynamic of people making decisions around that. And so on the office, so that's the second area of kind of data, if you will. So with respect to, I think we're kind of in some ways past the pandemic as the driver of this dynamic and much more into the unfolding hybrid work as the dynamic that's driving some of these things. I think that the balance of power between employers and employees has shifted, and it may take a long time if it, for that dynamic to change. And I think that it has, because the pandemic was so long, the new patterns that have developed, people don't want to work 9 to 5 and go to the office every day. It's just pretty clear. Even those that are in highly collaborative lines of work, They will work with intensity during the collaborative days of the week, and then they will have more thoughtful days of the week. And I think people like that. And I think it's going to be hard for that to change. I think it's a societal, psychological, sociological dynamic that is going to be here to stay. I think it will be interesting to see if that's still the pattern a year from now, but I think it's going to be. Just in our own office, we were basically told that if we make the accounting department come back to the office, they're all going to quit and go work someplace else. And they said, oh, and by the way, the marketing department too. And so, I mean, that's a pretty profound kind of change. And so I just think it's rippled through so many parts of our daily lives, and people have been given the liberty to reorient and shift. And I think, so we're going to see that, and I think that's going to remain the same. You know, as an owner of office space, we see businesses having a very, very difficult time anticipating what the pattern of their operating business is going to be, both in the quantity of people that are in the office, the environment that they work in, and how you rationalize, your office space. So the office has developed, the workspace has developed a whole different character. And I think we're watching that play out, and we're having companies have a very difficult time.
I'm wondering what you all think about how differently these patterns might play out in different parts of the region. I use the Prince George's Plaza metro station, and I park my car in the garage. That garage is practically empty, but by definition, anyone who's going to be using that has a car. And Stuart, you talked about like people might look at the traffic on any given day. If it's lower, they might drive in. If it's higher, they might work from home. I mean, and we saw those stats about how transit usage is also a suburban and exurban question right now. Do you think that different parts of the region are going to experience this differently?
Well, a couple things. Different sectors of the workforce will experience it differently as well. I think one of the things we can't forget is how strong bus ridership has remained throughout the pandemic. These are our essential workers. They're the ones who keep everything running all the time in our communities. Dash Bus, I kind of can talk about it in much more detail, but they're up to 95% of pre-pandemic. They're booming, and there's some good reasons for that he can talk about. Metro Bus, I think, is up to 88% of where it was. So the big drop, of course, was Metro Rail with the office workers on that. And when you looked at the patterns of wealth, much wealthier passengers tended to be riding the Metro compared to the bus network. Michael can talk about the downtown. I mean, what it means for a downtown if we don't have as many offices downtown, what's concentrated there, or whether it can evolve into more mixed use with more residential. There may be more activity in the suburbs. Our hope is, as smart growthers, that people will embrace what we call 15-minute neighborhoods. So even if you're working from home and telecommuting, it's sure going to be nice to have a coffee shop nearby, or be able to walk to pick up your kids, still have the kids in daycare maybe, because if you're working from home, and you pick them up at daycare, but you're walking or biking for those trips. So again, there's 80% of trips that are non-work trips. How many of those can we now do, hopefully within a 15-minute walk-bike radius of your house and not have to get in your car? One of the things that was interesting about the Voice of the Commute survey by the Council of Governments is there was a net negative 13% in terms of people wanting to drive. How many thought they'd drive more after the pandemic, and how many would drive less? It was leaned towards driving a lot less, whereas people definitely wanted to walk and bike more. And I think they discovered the joys of walking and biking. You saw bike sales go through the roof, and we had shortfalls of those. And so if some of that lingers, I think people would enjoy having that walkable lifestyle, even if they're in a telecommute mode living in the suburbs.
So if I could add on to that, since you did bring up Dash, and I'm really proud of what we're doing in Alexandria with our bus system. We went fare-free last year in September, and there's an immediate spike in ridership as soon as we went fare-free. And on top of being fare-free, we also changed our bus map, or in our system map, so that we were within a quarter mile of the majority of residents were low income, that were minority, that were more likely to be utilizing some of the public transit. And going back to what I said with having all day reliable service, right? So if you know there's a bus coming every 10 minutes, you don't care what time it is. You just walk outside and you're going to hop on. And that's exactly what we've seen. And like Stuart was saying, we're at about 95% of pre-pandemic levels. And we actually have one bus route that is above pre-pandemic levels. And it's been above pre-pandemic levels for several months now. So it's pretty amazing. And I understand Alexandria's a smaller jurisdiction, so it's a little bit more compressed. We have a lot more density, so it's a little bit easier. But I think about some of my friends down in Prince William County where, the investments just haven't been made in public transit. But if you can create those 15-minute communities, another one of those options is if you have a reliable, public transit system. And in Prince William, the bus would basically come every hour. So it's like, if you miss that bus, forget about it. You're done. You're probably not going anywhere for the rest of the day. And I always joke with my colleagues down there about it because I had the opportunity to work down there for 7 years, and some similarities in Loudoun as well. But if we start making some of those investments, and I know Loudoun started to make some of those investments in Bus Now, it makes a huge difference. And it'll change the way our commutes look even locally, not just commuting from exurban to urban or suburban to urban, but even just within our own community. I think about Loudoun. I was just out there a couple of days ago, and even their regular streets look like highways, right? Because they're so wide. You've got like 4 lanes on each side. I'm like, how are all these lanes still so packed all the time? So a lot of things that we could work on, and we just need to have people be open-minded to some of it, because I hate to be cliche, but if you build it, they will come, right?
And do you see WMATA going in that direction? I mean, we've been pretty careful to caveat that, commute trips are not all trips, but those commute trips were in a large way what the system was designed around. They're a really important source of revenue. Do you think that a big system like WMATA can adapt to be a more all-day service that isn't just about bringing people from the suburbs to the downtown, or do you think they have some real challenges there?
There's definitely some challenges, but that's actually been an active conversation that we've been having about it's not just getting people into DC, but also out of DC and in between. The bus system, like we were saying, never really dropped, right? We're still at about 85, 88% of pre-pandemic levels with the bus system. And I think we're actually going to go through a Metro bus rework of the system in the next few months. And I think that's where we're going to have another opportunity to adjust routes, to make sure that we're hitting all the communities that we need to. And also going back to what I said earlier about more frequent service, more reliable service. I think with Metro Rail, it'll be, we started implementing something with weekends. We have flat rates. Of course, we are running into a couple of issues that we need to work out. And I think the big thing is that, number one, we're always taking safety as the number one issue. And number two, we're trying to be as transparent as possible with any issues that WMATA is facing, because that's the biggest thing we could do. We can't control decades of underinvestment. We can't control, culture that we need to try and adjust. We're working on that, and that's going to take time. But as we're going forward, the more transparency we could have, we could show everyone that we're working in a positive manner to move forward towards these goals of having all-day reliable service, of making sure people could get in and out of the city using Metro Rail on the weekends, late at night, and those types of things.
There is this vision, right, I think, for what transit services can be, but you also hear a lot of quite dark talk about the future of transit services and this idea of the death spiral where you don't have the revenue, so you pull back service, then people say, well, I don't want to use the system that doesn't have good service, and so it just goes down and down. Do you think that's like a real risk, Michael, or what's your sense?
Well, when you look at the magnitude of the drop from 300 million to 100, 125 million, that certainly is cause for concern, especially if you start to see a pattern where the present commuting patterns start to get locked in. I'm going to pivot a little bit. I wanted to talk about a little bit about kind of overlapping public policy concerns with respect to the transportation and affordable housing. And so when you talk about everybody spoke about the statistics around the number of people that went back to using the bus and Dash, extremely high levels of utilization. Well, those are clearly, you know, workers that are in the, I don't know what the exact numbers are in terms of where they are in the economic arena, but getting affordable housing and creating it where the natural pool of metro and bus ridership is. I mean, that's your audience. That's your biggest audience. And how do you create tools around that so that you are driving more people to actually use it? And so I think getting more sync up and getting more realization around the need for more affordable housing and creating a set of incentives so that you're driving those people that will utilize the infrastructure that you've already built.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah.
Thank you, Mike, for bringing up that point. That is one of the top things we talk about. You know, it's interesting, Leah, your report is kind of dark, and I think it's missing some of the many positives about transit, and it's almost blaming the victim, because the guilty party here is land use. Poor land use, sprawl, scattered, auto-dependent development. Hard to have good transit in the suburbs without better, more sustainable patterns of land use. And I used to say, you know, it was from a 70s planner who said there are no transportation solutions to transportation problems, only land use solutions. I have to take into saying there are only housing solutions now to transportation problems.
Right.
Affordable housing in the right location is the best transportation solution we could all invest in, echoing what you've said. $100 million for affordable housing in the right place is worth far more than $100 million for yet another interchange that will only move the bottleneck somewhere else. So yet we have put our transportation funding on autopilot with locked-in funding streams, bonded and all that, and every year we have to beg for extra affordable housing funding. So the system is upside down. And with affordable housing funding, you're not only achieving a transportation solution, you are also helping a family obviously have security, a roof over their head, have access to opportunity. Their kids have stability, so they learn better in school. There are so many other co-benefits that come with that housing investment.
I got to jump in here too on this one. So I remember being at a panel with former city council members from Alexandria, and one of the questions they asked was, what is one of your biggest regrets from your time on council? And one of the council members said, we didn't develop around our metro stations. And it showed, because in Alexandria, we have some of the most underutilized stations in the entire system. We're starting to try and change that. And recently, we just approved a new development with 800 units in it, 44 of which are affordable. I'm not so happy with the number. I wish it was more, but in Virginia, we have some constraints. But to what we're talking about, right, one of the other issues is that it's so expensive to live near one of these transit hubs, right? But the other thing too, COG set goals recently for the entire region, right? And so all of the COG members essentially have agreed that 75% of all new housing that's going to be built, that it be built near an activity center or a high capacity transit hub. And so it's just super, super important. And we have to also keep in mind this housing issue and make sure that it's affordable for people to be there. And that we're not pricing people out just because it is a transit hub.
So do these stations still look appealing as places to develop as a business proposition?
Absolutely. Yeah, I don't think you would build an office building in today's world that didn't have relatively immediate access to a metro station. Mm. Even if only 10% of the people are using it, you almost have to check the box. You have to cover your backside and build in that kind of environment. So I think you're going to see the suburban office buildings that have become obsolete turn into housing, but most quality Class A office buildings are only being built in that kind of urban environment.
And so, I mean, like looking at the Silver Line, for example, that goes really quite far out of town.
Right.
Do you think that the far ends of that are going to become mostly residential areas, or are you seeing some mixed use with office too?
No, I think you'll see both. Mm. I mean, I think it's been predominantly an office corridor in terms of the new construction, but you're seeing much more housing get built.
And did you have something like that?
I mean, the stats are pretty amazing. I mean, the Business Journal and the Post started reporting about this 15 years ago or more, where 80% or more of new office construction was within a half mile of metro station. And in the last decade, 60% of multifamily has been within a half-mile of metro station, and 85% within activity centers. So not all of COG's activity centers have high-capacity transit. So we've been doing pretty darn well. Chris Lineberger, who's been at Brookings and GW, has talked about how we have more centers of walkable urbanism or walk-ups than anywhere in the country because we have been so successful at it. You know, Arlington, DC, Bethesda sort of led the way, but Alexandria's caught up, and they're giving Arlington a great race now. It took years for Fairfax to wake up to it. They used to call Arlington a four-letter word, but then they said, wait a minute, what's working in Arlington, we need to fix Tyson's using an Arlington model. So the region has adopted transit-oriented development as the future vision, as the most sustainable way to grow. And as Kenneth said, I mean, it was a unanimous vote of the COG board in December that they would prioritize all new development or most new development at high-capacity transit stations.
And I mean, we've talked a lot about transit, and I think it's really important for this region, but we also know that people do drive, and a lot of people get around this region in cars, and there's a lot of investment happening in the Beltway. You know, there's big investments in roads that are still like on the docket. Do those still make sense, or do some of the questions with the uncertainty about transit, should they be applied to roads, and do you think that they are going to be? I don't know if Kenneth, you have a view on that.
So I think we have to, put it in context that we're still starting from a point where, car has been king for so long, for so many decades, and that the infrastructure that we've invested in the most is car-centric and doesn't take into account any other users, right? So when we're trying to kind of change the dynamic to make sure that it's safe for all users, for bikers, for people on scooters, for public transit and everything else, we're kind of going against the tide, but it's not to say that they can't live together. I mean, all you have to do is go to Europe and see that you've got bikers, walkers, public transit, and cars all on the same road, essentially. So is it doable? Yeah, absolutely. Is it going to take time? Yeah, because the investments that have been made, we have to essentially change, readjust, and it's a little bit difficult sometimes to bring that concept to folks, to say that we can commingle, it'll be all right, and it's not going to have a huge effect, and it'll actually improve positions for drivers, right? Because if it's a safer road for everybody else, it's a safer road for drivers, and they'll be able to have their commute just as well. So it's an uphill battle because it's going to take large amounts of investment. It's going to take political will. The folks that are making the decisions have to have the strength to say, yes, I want to make this investment now, because ultimately it's an investment for the future, right? Because we're all going to have to get around still.
Go ahead.
Well, it's funny. I used to, in the early days of the 90s, when we were first debating smart growth, we'd have opponents say, well, nobody wants to live near transit or in downtown DC or whatever. And I said, are you kidding me? Have you seen the prices? And it's the old adage from Yogi Berra, no one goes there anymore, it's too crowded. That's, it's like, what was the market telling us? We're free market people. The market is telling us on a per square foot basis, people value these urban walkable places much more. DC, over a decade before the pandemic, gained about 120,000 people in a decade. At one point, they were gaining 1,000 people a month or more in some parts of it, and then it started to slow a little bit. Every one of those people is really a transportation solution, because most of them were driving a lot less. Many of them didn't own cars. They were walking, biking, using transit more. And I think some of those I know who did drive, just anecdotally, had to go to tech firms that weren't actually located in a good transit accessible place. They were probably driving out. They were, quote, reverse commuting. Driving, we need to drive. People do drive. The goal, though, is to give people more options to get around. And for many people, they don't have to drive most days of the week, but others do. But we've had an imbalanced system for so long. We have spent so much since the interstate highway system on road expansion. It's been, now in metropolitan areas, it has a diminishing return. Induced demand is real. They fill up in no time, and they don't gain you anything. One of my great disappointments about this region and our states, especially Virginia in this case, is we backed into the hot lane program without really thinking about it, without really comparing it to what the other options would have been. We've probably spent at least $12 billion combined on the Beltway, I-95, and 66. what else would we have bought for that $12 billion? Because while I think the hot lanes will give you a peak hour option, I don't think they help us with more sustainable land use. And they don't deal with induced demand. They depend on the general purpose lanes and somebody suffering in traffic anyway. So what would have been different had we done a more of a transit TOD alternative to 12 billion in hot lanes, probably headed to 20 billion worth by the time, if Maryland does it.
And Virginia has got some tension for developing a system where they would try and price out these different benefits, right? So they looked at widening I-95 versus a rail option, and they figured out we think rail is more cost effective. Do you think that under the current political leadership though in Virginia with Governor Youngkin, is he going to be interested in pursuing those kinds of ideas? What do you think?
Again, hard to predict the future. He was, many people know he really didn't have a transportation platform when he came in. He didn't have a platform in a number of different areas. I mean, it was quite the revelation to hear the Secretary of Transportation of Virginia say, we looked at widening I-95 the whole way at $12 billion, and it made no difference. Therefore, we are committing to another mode here, and that's why they've made some of the most amazing rail investment of any state in the country, and their commitment to the Long Bridge, up ultimately 4 tracks to Richmond, buying half the right-of-way from CSX, and other extensions as well. So a big rail commitment. Regarding the current governor, he's a Republican. We've got a Republican House. In the mid-2000s, the smart growth movement, we were working with Republicans, the Republican speaker, and he supported smart growth because it would save tax dollars. He said, I am tired of the bill being handed to the state by these local governments with their poor land use planning. I'm paraphrasing. I don't remember exactly what he said back then. I do remember going into his office and converting what was their HB2, which was not the North Carolina HB2. It was the HB2 that was going to be all about congestion reduction, and that got converted into the nationally heralded smart scale prioritization system. And that was because this Republican speaker said, I want more cost-effective spending on transportation. I want it tied to more sustainable land use, although he didn't use the word sustainable. So my hope is with Governor Youngkin, and that we first focus on fix it first. This country could spend every last dime that's in this current infrastructure bill and any other infrastructure bill just to maintain the roads, water, sewer, police, fire, transit systems that we've got. Yet we never do that. We create this alarm that everything's crumbling, which it is, but we then take most of that money with the blank check Congress gives them, and we build new stuff instead of fixing the old. But my hope is with any Republican governor, any governor, that we fix existing infrastructure first and tie the other transportation investments to more efficient land use.
A lot of people don't realize this, but VRE, the Virginia Railway Express, actually takes 2 highway lanes off of traffic. 2 highway lanes, just with VRE. So these investments are real. I was there with Governor Northam when he made the momentous, announcement. Very, very excited about it. A lot of the money is already kind of there and prepared to do some of this. I don't believe the governor is going to try and change any of that. And as an aside, as chair of the Northern Virginia Transportation Commission, one of the things we've been, talking about, and I don't want to scare staff because they might be watching, but we did want to invite some of our state legislatures and some of the folks from the governor's office up to Northern Virginia to see how we're utilizing this money for some of the multimodal purposes, right? So they could see the VRE, they could see the metro system, they could see the bus system, they could see the investments in electric buses, everything that we're doing up here and how everything connects, even the water taxi that we utilize in Alexandria. When we had all our metro stations shut down, the water taxi, I can't tell you how excited everybody was about it. It was a huge hit. So being able to highlight those types of things, I think, shows the value to everyone else who might be in a different part of the state, just thinks it might be a black hole that we're spending money on in transportation here. But once you show people and it becomes tangible, they have a newfound respect for it and an understanding.
And did you?
I was going to go back and weave 2 things together and around the housing policies and WMATA. I mean, WMATA has access to a lot of land by its stations. As someone, I haven't worked with them recently, but in the real estate community, the perception is that they're difficult and cumbersome and bureaucratic, and in some ways not worth your time messing with them. And so I would say mean, I know that there's new leadership there, and so I think getting a much more robust and a market-oriented approach, with that land to get more housing, at the metro stations, I think is an important element. And again, we're talked about this smart growth, and these things don't operate in isolation.
Right.
Just building roads is part of a whole pattern of activities. And so, getting a better and more efficient sync up between them, I think, is critical.
And do you feel as a developer that you have the confidence to make investments right now, that you can be confident about them paying off, or is this a period where you're being pretty conservative and waiting to see how things shake out?
No, we're optimists. We're always. And if someone will give us the money, then we'll keep doing what we do. I don't mean that in a cynical way, but I mean those are the forces. But I think that, look, it's a long game. When you're building, first of all, it takes you 3 or 4 years to get from the idea to actually having something on the ground. So you can't kind of like make these decisions, based on where the stock market is, for example,
Right.
Every day. You'd have to take kind of a long view and believe in the macro trends that are going to drive that development and that value. So I think it's a tumultuous time, and it's one that creates opportunity. Right. I mean, the stuff we're working on are, busted malls and office buildings that don't work anymore. I mean, this period actually is full of great opportunity, and we can make some of the changes. We can pour more housing, into the central business district and make that more vibrant. We can take areas that have been fallow for 30 years and turn them into the next generation of things. So I think the business community is full of ingenuity, and it will, adapt. It needs incentives. I mean, it needs to get pushed. It needs to have signals, if you will, that things are, certain kinds of things are important. But I think it will adapt, and it probably just we need more of the policy process to help facilitate that and have good policies that are consistent, that, recognize what the private sector needs, but also what the public policy, aspect of that's needed as well, because we don't operate in a vacuum.
I want to go back to the Metro Joint Development. They did just announce a new 10-year, very aggressive plan to roll out more of these joint development opportunities and get the deals done within a decade. Liz Price is the new head of their team. Nina Albert was great before that, and she had been getting this system ginned up and moving faster. Getting rid of the one-for-one parking replacement requirement is a big deal. They've technically done that, so that was adding too much cost to the developers. One of the challenges, though, you're also working local jurisdictions, so you also need the local jurisdiction approval. And so it gets complicated when you have two sets of actors like that. And often, WMATA needs to sort of make the deal and then try to sell the deal after the fact, and the public never likes that. But I'm working right now, we're working in Huntington, and we know the developers, we know the WMATA team, we know the local neighbors, we know the supervisor, but we've got to get the deal done on Huntington. One of the challenges is, speaking of what the public could be doing here, Fairfax DOT, VDOT don't want to pay for the infrastructure. They want the developer to cover it in what they're going to do, and the developer says it's not going to pencil out. We need there a bus transfer station that ideally will be one level down with a nice, beautiful public plaza on top as an amenity for this high-density community at Huntington Metro. But Fairfax DOT does not see that as their responsibility, and they say, well, WMATA pay for it or the developer pay for it. No, that's as important a transportation investment as any interchange or road you could make. Why wouldn't you do that? So you do need, and then in Prince George's, which has a weaker market where the costs are the same to construct, but the rents aren't not the same, you do need state and local investment to also jumpstart that. Once it's jump-started, I think, and once we get more of the, some of those metro stations are starting to really come along, you'll get a critical mass, you'll get the movement, and it won't need that sort of additional public support, but it will to catalyze it.
Joe, if you want to just quickly, and then I want to give people a chance to jump in with any questions.
Sure. No, I was just going to say, as you can all see, there's a lot of different players, a lot of different priorities that goes into a lot of this, and it is having good partners to be able to make something happen. He was talking about abandoned malls. That would be ours at Landmark in the city of Alexandria. And I mean, we've been spending decades trying to revive this thing. And even though it's not next to a metro station, we are planning to put
There's a transit hub.
It's going to be a transit hub for buses.
Multimodal.
It's going to be BRT, local buses, WMATA buses, the whole deal. So we're making sure that it's going to be available to everybody. And again, I just can't stress enough to having good partners. People need to be on the same page, have a similar vision, and then we get into the details of penciling out some of the money and everything. But we all have to come to the table and be able to be willing to chip in as well.
Great stuff. Well, is there anyone in the room here who has a question? And I think looks like there's a mic, so we'll start over there and maybe go across this way, I guess.
I'm expecting to see the yellow hands from Zoom or something.
Yeah, well, I've got a system here. So.
Hello, I'm a resident of Potomac Yard. I had a question about when the new Potomac Yard Metro Station is complete. First of all, are they going to develop the, right now there's a plot of land right next to the new Metro Station entry that's half covered by a parking lot and half covered by some grass and a concrete tarmac. And I'm trying to find out this is between
The Virginia Tech?
Seton Avenue and I think it's East Glebe or South Glebe Road, I think it is, next to Potomac Avenue. Are they going to redevelop that, number one? And number two, when the station is complete, are there plans to actually redevelop that strip mall that's over there that has the Target store and all that stuff in it into more the new urban walkable type of neighborhood there? Thanks.
Yes and yes, that's the short answer. Everything is going to come in phases, though. The strip mall where the Target is, that's going to be longer phase, so that's probably 10, 15, 20 years. But everything that is directly north and south of the station currently, that's going to be developed right now in the 5 to 10 year phase, with Virginia Tech bringing their innovation campus, of course, just north of it, yes.
So this block between Seton and Glebe is going to be redeveloped too, is that correct? The parking lot now?
I'm trying to remember where Seton and Glebe is. Is it right next to the Giant?
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
East of the Giant, yes.
It's just east of the Giant. Yes, that will be redeveloped at some point. I think the initial plans were a hotel, but depending on what the market is, we're going to have to see.
We have a question here. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I wanted to get your reaction to what the National Capital Planning Commission is doing. They've just put forth a Pennsylvania Avenue initiative. And what they're saying they want to do with Pennsylvania Avenue is, there's 4 lanes now, we can cut that down to 2 lanes, or if you don't like that, we'll cut it down to 1 lane, or we'll cut it down to 0 lanes. 3 choices, to which my reaction would be none of the above, that they really would get traffic all tied up. There's like 20,000 or 35,000 cars per day going down there, and they all have to get stalled in traffic. And on Saturday, 3 days from now, they have a webinar at 10 a.m. in the morning of NCPC, National Capital Planning Commission, and they will take people's comments. And from their first 2 meetings, they had 3 times as many people saying, don't do it in the second meeting as in the first meeting. And maybe another 3 times more coming Saturday. But to get to it, you go to Google and do NCPC space Pennsylvania, and all this will come up, and you can put in your comments.
Well, I'll dare to take this one on,
Yeah, go for
even though I have not yet looked at the Pennsylvania Avenue plans. The most successful cities today are finding ways to better balance their transportation systems and to favor transit, walking, and biking. Paris is being transformed. London, with its congestion cordon and other investments, is being transformed, maybe not quite as much as Paris at this point, although none of us have had a chance, so many of us have not had a chance to go see those places in a while. But and our business community partners, a lot of the bids, the business improvement districts and others are also looking at how they can get a better balance, like the Georgetown bid and the downtown bid between cars and people in the city. There are huge economic benefits to a more walkable city over one that's choked with cars. There is, believe it or not, traffic does disappear. People will change modes. They will change the time of day when they'll move around, and life can return to the streets often in these cases. So I wouldn't dismiss it out of hand. We certainly would want to look at the studies. And it's very possible Pennsylvania Avenue is used a lot less than, say, a Constitution Avenue or a 14th Street or something like that. Yeah. So there may be potential for our Grand Avenue to become one that, if you notice, it doesn't have a lot of people life on it. Obviously it's a lot of government buildings. We could provide more mixed use and vibrancy to that street.
Well, we were talking briefly about, I think you mentioned Copenhagen when we were out in the anteroom. I mean, if you go to Copenhagen or Amsterdam, cars are not the priority form of transportation in the design of the street environment. It's bikes, it's people, it's scooters. And we still are working from a prioritization of cars as the method of transportation. But I think it is in the tight urban core where you start that process and let people live through it and appreciate what that environment can be, and then let it kind of grow out from there.
And that's kind of what Copenhagen did. I met some of the architects of the changes there, and if you look at these European cities, you'll hear in a discussion, oh, that's Europe, they're different.
Yeah.
Well, you look at the pictures of Copenhagen in the 60s and 70s, and it looks like Rome with all the cars on the sidewalks and everything else, and cars everywhere in all the plazas. That's what they were like even in Scandinavia, but that has been transformed, and they've recovered these streets for people, and they, of course, do fully pedestrianized streets in their case.
Just real fast, because also we don't want to dismiss people who are car dependent. We know that there's a lot of seniors that, the public transit might be too far away and the car is the best utilization. And Stuart started off by saying it's a balance, right? And so I'm glad at least there's some options that, 1 lane, 2 lane, 3 lane, 4 lane, you guys can have a discussion about it because it should be balanced. But we don't always have to go to Europe either, right? If you go to Madison, Wisconsin, the state capital, right? The state capital is actually, the main road is closed off and it's all walkable. So there are examples here in the States as well.
I'm going to just quickly go to one of these questions that's coming from online. So it's pretty appropriate for the moment. How do we adjust transit systems with dysfunctional management? We've had a bit of a display of that here this week. Is it a real problem? Is it people come and people go and it's fine, or does it really hold the region back to have that kind of management? Anyone want to take that?
Do we want to put
I'm out.
the chair of the Northern Virginia Transportation Commission, maybe?
It's just the question was, how do we address transit systems with dysfunctional management?
So I think it starts with bringing in the right people, and I'm really excited about the new hire, bringing Randy on from Austin. I think he's going to bring a lot of energy, a lot of experience. He was actually here in the DC area, so he knows more or less what he's coming into. And I think, like I said earlier, one of the biggest things is just to be transparent, because there are going to be bumps in the roads. There are going to be major bumps, major mishaps, major issues that happen. But the best thing that you could do is be transparent. Tell everybody what happened, what we're trying to do to address it, and how we're going to try and move forward. And that's the best thing that we could do, because...
Yeah, I'd like to add that, first of all, there's a lot of good that the outgoing general manager, Paul Wiedefeld, did for the system. He was getting it back on track with, obviously, he can't do it alone, with the support of people in management and on the line. You saw transit ridership and latest thing was trending up in 2019. It was up 11%, in one quarter, the end of the quarter, last quarter of 2019 compared to the last quarter of 2018. A lot of that was a reflection of confidence was coming back in the system. There was better information and transparency. They were doing a great job with their fixes to platforms and stuff and so forth. The pandemic obviously was a body blow. But the 7,000 series problem and then this recent failure of keeping up certifications are a big red flashing light. I helped form with the business community Metro Now, so you have all the leading business groups in the region plus my nonprofit involved in supporting Metro, but also pushing Metro. So we were key in getting the capital funding that has enabled them to do that rebuilding, the long-term, first ever dedicated funding. But we've also supported reforms like their IG. We've supported the Safety Commission as well. As a Navy veteran who was in aviation, the thing I had always concerned me, and it's hard for those of us on the outside to know what it's like on the tracks, in the maintenance sheds and all that, what's the story with their safety culture? And it appears that there are real challenges, either a complete lack of safety culture or there's certain communication problems that are causing them problems on safety in particular. And every person on staff should be a safety officer, literally, no matter how junior, and should be empowered to report safety issues, to talk about safety issues, and to bring things to attention, not try to hide things. So I don't know why there was a hiccup, a big problem on the wheel sets and the axles with the 7000 series. And I certainly don't know how many different people missed the certification problem. But those drivers themselves knew they weren't current on their certification either. Why didn't they raise their hand and say, hey, boss, my certification lapsed, I'm sorry, can I get it done? So they've all got to be accountable. I don't know if it's union versus management split or what it is, but that's where great leadership, and hopefully the board has found a great, inspiring leader to take on from there, because there are more problems to address, and can really walk the line with the troops and find out what's going on and fix these problems.
And having the proper policies and procedures in place and making sure if it's not being followed that there are consequences for that.
I think there was a question in the middle of the room somewhere. Yeah, go ahead.
Hi. Thanks. Yeah. You were talking earlier about kind of access for seniors and bicycling. I live in Baltimore, and I take the train down here to AEI 4 days a week, and it's great that I'm able to take my bike on the train and come up here from Union Station, but there's a lot of places that I can't go, and a lot of people can't go because it's not easy to take bikes on trains, or because just that last leg is really difficult to reach on public transit. So what can be done to improve kind of the last leg between where the train, the metro, or even where the buses drop you off and where people want to go?
Shift investment priorities. Again, away from the $100 million interchange to the last mile bike walk access that you need. Sham Cannon, the former head of planning for Metro, he left for HDR. His replacement is Allie Davis, who couldn't join us today, but they've said that the most cost-effective thing we can do to increase Metro ridership, among other things, is to improve the last mile bike walk accessibility. Not building parking garages, but building the bike walk investment. And we should think about that for everything. Safe routes to school, same thing. Why can't our kids walk to school safely? Because the road infrastructure is built for cars and big wide roads, and you wouldn't want your kid to walk or bike. Safe routes to the store, same thing. So, but that's what we do, and hopefully we can also learn from the Europeans and others about better bike service on trains as well.
And adjusting bus routes as necessary. And breaking news, well, not so breaking, but VRE is now also allowing bikes on the train. So small steps like that.
Yep.
And yeah, go ahead.
How, if at all, should the rise of self-driving cars affect the goals of public transportation systems in the long term?
I've got a super quick one, but I'm going to defer to my colleagues up here. One of my favorite pictures is one of 60 people, 60 cars. 60 people, 60 autonomous electric cars, hopefully. One bus.
Yeah, it's still physics of space. I mean, although AVs can technically use space more efficiently, but there'll still be an upper limit to that. And they're farther off than many people think, I think. It's always around the corner, right? And I think you're more likely to see autonomous trucks and autonomous buses before you see autonomous cars. Let's look at the full picture too. I mean, what will it take for them to see everything on the roads? Will we solve the problem of them being able to detect pedestrians and cyclists? And I'm really worried about who's going to be writing the algorithms for the decision-making about whether to hit that pedestrian or not to save the driver's life. I don't know. There's a lot of unanswered questions, just like there's still lots of challenges with electric vehicles as well that we're, many people are only now just discovering. Oh, what about all the mining? What about all the sources from places that are our enemies? What's the total carbon investment cost in manufacturing new vehicles? I mean, I am a bit of an evangelist. I wouldn't have been at this for 25 years, but I think going back to that mixed-use, walkable, bikeable, transit-accessible place is still going to be the key thing, whether or not the vehicles are electric or autonomous.
And like always, we all said too, that some of the land policy stuff, right? The people that are making the policy decisions, we have to be making better land policy decisions. And I'll just throw in, because you said the algorithm, I'm hoping that the algorithm can also see people of color, because that has been a big issue as well.
Yeah.
Do you want to, yeah, go ahead.
Great point.
Thank you. First, I have to apologize for my voice. I have problems. So anyway, before we use Europe as an example, I think we have to look deeper into what's actually going on in Europe. They are doing much worse than us in every sense. To give you an example, we talk about Sweden. About 90% of people that live in Sweden have the capacity to pay only interest on the homes they own. If we will have that scenario here, you will see people going on the streets and protesting. Second, here, the American Disabilities Act is very important to Americans, and we respect that. And the same goes for seniors and for young people that don't have the capacity to live in Washington, D.C. We have 46 million people in the United States that are over 65 years old. They cannot be riding bikes or all of that. They need to drive. Sometimes it's even hard for them to drive. And then you have disabled people. The American mentality, thank God, is very respectful to disabled people. And they always try to allow and find ways. We have strong laws that protect disabled. So you have to take that into account. The American mentality, which in my mind is the best in this world. And we need to keep that American spirit. And talking about politics, my experience, and I am old and I learned something in those years, you find the right solutions, not when everybody thinks alike and you get into groupthink, but instead when you have people that think differently. And a leader is able to attract that. For example, Glenn Youngkin. Glenn Youngkin won because he got a lot of votes from the Democrats in Virginia. 56% of Hispanics voted for Glenn Youngkin. And you have this, it is true, I was in that campaign, by the way. I worked hard on that. So I really know my numbers.
60% of Latinos voted for Terry McAuliffe.
56% of Hispanics, and I have the numbers, voted for Glenn Youngkin. And I was in that group, so I know my numbers. And you know why? Because he talked to everybody. He didn't get inside the Republican vote. He would not have been elected otherwise, because most Virginians vote Democrat. They don't vote Republican. The same thing with Maryland. The same thing with Maryland. You have Larry Hogan. Marylanders tend to vote Democrat.
I can talk
Larry
about
Hogan
the
is
ADA thing, for
Republican, so.
example.
Do you want to pose a question or?
Well, that was really, the question is, like, this is your best moment to present your ideas to the right two governors in Virginia and in Maryland. Are you going to use that, or you are going to just go with this defeated, mentality that I'm not going to get anything from him or from them in this case?
I don't think anybody said that or has a defeated mentality, so I'm a little confused by the question.
Yeah, and I noted I've always worked in a bipartisan way. Like I said, we would not have had all these smart growth bills in 2007 unless we'd worked with both Governor Kane and the Republican Speaker, Bill Howell, at the time. Because these issues cut across political party, and actually we feel like we often have no home in either party sometimes in the things we support. Going back to the ADA and people with disabilities, I mean, what we're trying to do to make our streets safer has everything to do with improving safety for anybody with disability. The other night at our two of our strongest supporters have eyesight impairment, and they live in Alexandria actually, and they've gone on our walking tours often with us, and they came to our event. They are very interested in how we make the crossing distances shorter at the intersections, how we make the cars slower. They certainly will be very concerned about AVs and how they're going to detect them. as well. So we're trying to make the on-street movement environment much safer for pedestrians. And nobody's saying we're giving up cars either. I mean, the good news for if you're older and have to drive is we're going to get all these young whippersnappers off the roads, right? And give the roads over to somebody who may need to use it. We have to make transit more accessible for people with disabilities or who may be older. I mean, it's crazy that Amtrak in Virginia, we still don't have a plan for high-level boarding, in part largely because of the freight railroads. So you have steps, and it's constantly an accident waiting to happen. That is a significant ADA issue in our transit investment on the rails in Virginia.
We are making investments specifically at the Alexandria station to make the station level, specific for ADA. And one of the other things I forgot when I mentioned the adjustments to our bus routes for the Alexandria Transit Vision is that I mentioned the minority and the low income, but the other high percentage that we're trying to be close to were our seniors within our city, to make sure that seniors were close to these bus stops as well.
And the kind of environments that we're talking about creating are very, very conducive to older people.
Yeah. Not to mention, it's healthier to keep walking. All the seniors that I know that are doing the best are the ones who've kept walking. Now, if we sit at home and watch TV and just drive our cars, no matter what age we are, we're getting much less healthy year after year. So these walkable environments are significantly important for our longevity and health.
I've got one question here, and then did you have a question? You can have the privilege of the last one. So, the question from online here is, are we too committed to a hub and spoke model when places like Tyson's Corner are developing quickly? I think we've touched on this a bit, but are we seeing lots of downtowns all over the region, and is that, or are we underserving those downtowns that are out of the big downtown?
I mean, I think transit's helping to spur a lot of this development. And like we had mentioned earlier, a lot of the development that you see is going to be next to a transit hub. For some of the existing spots, I'm not too sure. But, that goes back to, I think, the land policy, what we're deciding to do with some of the existing areas and how we can connect them to other transit hubs or make them the walkability within that one site, the 15-minute community that was mentioned.
Hub and spoke can be pretty efficient, though. One of the great studies was Connect Greater Washington back in 2015 that Allie Davis, who's now the VP for Planning for Metro, headed up, and that showed if we were able to build out our TOD, but especially TOD on the east, transit-oriented development on the east side of the region, we would significantly improve the performance of the roads and of Metro. Metro would move from a subsidy to a surplus on operating side because you'd have people going back and forth both directions all day. Right now, if you don't have development at a suburban metro station, it's been inbound commute in the morning, outbound in the evening has been the typical pattern, and the trains are empty going the opposite direction from the commute. This would make the system much more efficient and focus more development, improve the performance of the road, reduce the amount of parking actually you'd need in the region. That said, we are getting a circumferential rail line right now called the Purple Line, and we're supposed to get one still at Alexandria at the Wilson Bridge someday. We were promised it when the Wilson Bridge was done and we got it designed to carry the weight of Metro Rail, but Virginia's just announced more hot lanes expansion. I think they have forgotten the rail promise. So I think I could see at least no farther than the distance of the Beltway, some suburban to suburban sort of rail connectivity, but again, only if you have the land use with it. It's not worth building the rail without the density that comes with it. And what the future really is also going to hold is the bus networks. Again, the bus network redesign that Conic talked about is going to be really important, and we need the state departments of transportation to give up some road space for dedicated bus lanes, bus rapid transit on our roadways. We've got a study coming out that was done by some students at Carnegie Mellon for us that is going to actually show that the bus corridors have a lot of promise for lots of transit ridership and mixed-use walkable development at a more affordable scale, too, in terms of the housing affordability.
And we have a BRT in Alexandria, and we're hoping to get a second one that'll actually traverse from Tyson's Corner to our west end of the Mark Center. So we're really excited about that. And I have to give a quick shout out to President Biden's Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. It's transformational money. It's the largest infrastructure investment we've seen. I think Virginia is going to be getting just over $1.2 billion. So there's a lot of different things that we're going to be doing in Virginia.
Did you have anything you want to add?
No.
Go ahead.
First, thanks to the panel. It's been a great discussion. You've all talked about housing, and we've talked about offices and their relationship. I was hoping you could tell me a little about retail. Like, what role does retail play when you are thinking about transit and where we're trying to get people to go on these non-commute trips, and both what are the policy tools and what are the real estate development issues in that? Thanks.
We want to start with the developer on the panel?
Yeah, I was going to say.
So I think the key to keeping retail vital is to have these environments that provide much more of an 18-hour day. You're not going to attract retail into a binary office environment unless there is robust housing in conjunction with it. So I think making sure that you create these dynamic communities that allow the retailers to have people, again, 18 hours of the day, rather than just a lunchtime or an evening time part of the day. So I think, again, it's a virtuous cycle that retail needs.
Going back to the city of Alexandria and what we're doing at Landmark Mall, we're going to have a hospital, we're going to have medical offices, we're going to have retail, we're going to have housing, we're going to have a fire department, we're going to have elderly living.
Affordable housing.
Affordable housing. So exactly to the point that he was just making, we want that to be a space that people want to come to. And also that people want to stay at. You know, the folks that are going to be living there, there's going to be green space, there's going to be meeting space. So there's going to be all kind of activities for people to enjoy right there that they don't have to go anywhere. But then we'll be inviting people from across the region to join us there as well.
Perfect. All right, well, I think we're pretty much coming up on our time, so I think we'll leave it there. But thanks, everybody, for joining us, and for anyone who was online joining us, and thanks to all the panelists as well.
Thank you. Good to see everyone in person.